Hi, everybody. All right, well, hello, and welcome to the second half of this very strange semester. I've never had one like this before. Uh, Never had to deal with this before, as most of you have hopefully never had to deal with this before either. But this is the way it is now. And so we're going to do the best that we can and offer this information to you and continue at this class the best way that we know how. So welcome to our impromptu classroom. Hope you like it, and this is what we got for the time being. I'm fairly certain that we're not going to be heading back to school anytime soon, if at all, for the rest of the semester. So this is what it's going to be. It's going to mean a lot of changes on your guys' part, the way that you study, the way that you get your stuff done, and so on. I understand if online learning is not your cup of tea. Once again, I understand it's not mine either, but it is what it is since we're not allowed to meet with each other anymore until all this nonsense goes away. So it's going to require new learning on my part as well too. I am not the most technically savvy person on the planet, so bear with me, and this is how we're going to do it for the rest of I think we got like 6 weeks left of class. You're going to have two YouTube videos, so this one and part one, and then you're going to have part two after we take a break or whatever. So not just have one giant video, but it'll be up on YouTube, and you already know this because you're watching it. But I will have these ready for you every week so that we keep track, keep pace, and try and approximate it as best as we can if we were actually in the classroom environment. It stings for me because I love seeing you guys. I love being in the classroom. I love fielding your questions. I love hearing your comments. I love having great discussions with you guys. And so this is just me talking to a camera, but it's the best that we can do. So if you do have any questions at the end of every one of these videos or whatever, please feel free to email them to me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type them up, and then I'm going to type up my answers alongside them, send those out to the rest of the classroom as well, because chances are that if you had that question, probably 2 or 3 other people had that question too. And so we're going to make this kind of a thing that, we're going to help everybody out, because that's the whole point. So if you have any questions, please send them to me via Canvas, and then I will get them typed up and answered and sent back to you as well. All this is as you know, is uploaded to, or not this YouTube, but everything that you're gonna have to do is uploaded to Canvas in the module, and I'll explain all that. And I have explained all that to you in the email that you're going to be getting shortly. Okay, but this is what we got, so we got to make do with it. And there we go. So first things first, stay safe, right? Make sure you're washing your hands, doing all that stuff. This is a very, very tough time. Very, very tough time for people around the country, especially when it comes to employment, work. I know that the classroom environment is probably not the first and foremost thing on your mind right now. But just know that the only way we can get through this is if we work together and kind of switch up how we normally do things. So it is what it is, and that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so let's get down to it. This is the second half of the semester, so we are done with the other stuff that we were talking about. So remember, we talked about the beginning of civilization. We talked about the rise of civilization in the Levant in Mesopotamia. We moved over back and forth a little bit. We started talking about the rise of the Greeks. We talked about the rise of Alexander the Great. And then the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about focusing on the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic. And why did we do that? Well, we did that for a lot of different reasons. Because Rome is the quintessential beginnings of European civilization, as opposed to even the Greeks. And we're going to be talking about that. What does it mean to have a European culture? Okay, but also the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic just lasted so long that there was just a lot to talk about, and we get so much of our modern world comes from both the Romans and the Greeks, but especially the Romans as well, when it comes to civic duty, when it comes to law and structure and order and things like that. We use the Romans as our, as our, cornerstone. They are the reason for a lot of the stuff that's going on. So anyway, we're moving on. You no longer need the Black Book by Matheson. We're done with that because we're done with the ancient world. We're moving on to the Middle Ages, okay? This is the book that you're looking at now. So this is The Worlds of Medieval Europe by Clifford Bachman. Hopefully you have this at this point, and that you didn't wait till right now to get it, because I believe that the bookstore is now closed, off limits, so you can't get in there and get it, even though they have copies of it sitting there. You can still get this online, I think from Chegg and Amazon. It's like $35 or something like that to rent it. But I don't know how that's working out now with the whole delivery process and people not coming in contact with each other and all that good stuff, or all that bad stuff as it may be. So hopefully you have this book because you're going to need it, okay? So there's that. Also, this would be the class that I would be explaining to you. Make sure that doesn't go to sleep. This is also the class I'd be explaining to you your final project. Now, the final project is a two-part project. It's a paper and a presentation. Well, that's kind of a big problem for a couple reasons. Number one, the paper is an 8-page paper, but since I have you guys do them as groups, it's much less work for me to read, 4 8-page papers as opposed to individual 8-page papers. The other thing is that it's a group project. I like it when people get together, 2 or 3 of you, and work on this together. Well, here we are in this time where you can work together now. So this project, I don't have it ready for you now because, well, it's not ready. I will have it ready for you by next week. So I will put all the instructions and everything else up there by next week. Don't worry, you'll still have plenty of time to get it done, what I'm coming up with. But once again, we're just going to have to make do. We're going to have to just do things differently than we have done in the past. That includes me as well too. So I'm going to come up with a new project for you guys to do. And that will not require you to meet with other people, unfortunately, because, well, that's how it is now. But I will have that for you next week, not this coming week. But for next week, I will have that ready for you, okay? And so there we go. Okay, folks, yeah, well, let's get going. Okay. The first half of the semester, we talked about, well, the ancient world, the rise of Mesopotamia, the rise of civilization, differentiation of specialization of labor. We talked about the rise of law systems, law codes, religious systems, things like that, and how they progressed over thousands of years. From the ancient Sumerians and the Mesopotamian tribes, all the way up to the Egyptians, then the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, then moving up to Greece. We start getting actually to Europe, geographic Europe proper. We see watershed moments like the rise of democracy, radical democracy. We saw the problems with that. We also saw the greatness with it as well too. And that's going to continue on. Then we went over and we talked about the rise and fall of the Roman Republic and the rise and fall of the Roman Empire as well too, and how they spread out. And to be in Europe was basically to be a Roman for hundreds and hundreds of years. But then at the end of the first part of this semester, we saw how that eventually ends. The Western Empire finally collapses after a 400-year run, almost 500-year run. And it finally collapses under the weight of a lot of different things. The invasions by barbarian tribes, the unceasing invasions by barbarian tribes. We see the collapse of the economy because there's no more expansion going on. We see that Romanization, this concept that Augustus really put into practice, it really starts to go by the wayside hundreds of years after he's long gone. We see the empire get split up, and we see civil war after civil war, Romans fighting each other, and they're just weakening each other. We also see the rise of Christianity, and that is going to be a big theme in this second half of this semester. the concept of, and we touched upon it a little bit, the rise of the state, right? The rise of, kings and queens working in conjunction or often at odds and enemies of the church, okay, the church. Now remember, just for reference, when I reference the church, when I reference Christianity, for the most part, I am, especially in the West, I'm talking about the Catholic Church, okay, based in Rome. I'm not talking about anything else because nothing else exists in the time period that we're talking about. There is no other churches floating around. They're not around. It's just the Catholic Church, okay? However, when I switch over, and I'll let you know, when we talk about the East, so remember, there's still the Eastern Roman Empire floating around over there in Constantinople, the city of Constantine. We're going to start talking about the Orthodox Church, the rise of the Orthodox Church. And these two churches start to, even though they both believe in Jesus, they believe in Jesus and everything else in two different ways. So we're going to see some headbutting and some fighting on that one, okay? Okay, and also, before we get to this, really quick, your midterms and everything are done. A couple of you have contacted me. If you want to know your midterm grade, we don't have to put that up anymore like we used to, but per WNC's rules. But if you want to know your midterm grade or you want to know what you got on the midterm test, please email me, as you know, and I will send you that information, okay? And there's plenty of time to make up your grade if you're not doing so hot, but most of you are doing just fine, okay? Okay, so let's get going. Your guiding question is, how did the ending of the Roman Empire in the West lead to the beginning of European cultures? Okay, so how did the ending, there we go. How did the ending of the Roman Empire in the West lead to the beginning of European cultures? As you can see, European is in quotations, okay? The reason being is because in, let's say, the year 800 or the year 1000, nobody is running around saying Europe this, Europe that, or calling each other Europeans, okay? That is a very modern concept. Nobody in present-day France, which wasn't called France in the year, let's say, 600, was not running around talking about Europe, okay? You couldn't find it on a map either because, well, there was no real maps being built or created during this time period. But eventually, the seeds that get sown here during this time after the fall of the West is what we see starts to slowly take root, and it starts to burgeon into this idea of Europe, okay? Europe as its own entity, this geographic and this cultural identity as compared to Africa or, the modern term, the Middle East or Asia, okay? But it slowly will become this European thing, okay? And so there we go. As I've told you many times before, it's really difficult when we see numbers, when we see dates, to specifically say this time period ended here or this thing started here. You always have to be very careful doing that, remember. Unless, a person, dies on a certain date, which most people do, when it comes to time periods, events, ages, that's a tough one, right? Nobody sat there on, let's say, January 18th, the year 476 and said, this is it. This is the end of the Western Roman Empire. People understand things in perspective. And so these dates are based off of, what historians and what people now, when we look backwards in time, we try and piece them together and say, because we like it, systematic. We like to say this happened there, this happened here, and this led to this. So the dates I'm going to give you are close approximations, okay? And I will explain to you as we get to that part in the talk why these dates are up there, okay? So the very first one that we have is the early Middle Ages. It goes from 476, right, the fall of the West, to the year 1000. Now that's a pretty cut and dry date, not the year 999 or 1001, but the year 1000. And I'll explain to you why many people say that's the cutoff date for that one, why historians think that. The second part is the High Middle Ages, and those go from 1000 to 1351. Once again, a very specific date. Why not 1358 or something like that? And we'll talk about that date. And then the Late Middle Ages, 1351, and then to 1500. And this one has a question mark on it because, once again, this one's the most, it's just not nailed down. When did the Middle Ages end? Is it based off of a specific event in time? Is it based off of a certain happening? Is it just something that everybody's kind of decided on? And so I put a question mark there because, this one is the trickiest number out of all these 6 numbers. Many people disagree on that. They say, well, no, it was not 1500, it's much earlier. And other people even say, no, it actually could go even later. So when we get there, we'll explain why, and you guys can see what you think, okay? All right, so hopefully you're all with me, okay? You haven't put me on in the background and run off to do something else, okay? Okay, so let's get going. Everybody has this. How did the ending of the Roman Empire in the West lead to the beginning of European cultures? And then here's your dates. Okay. All right, and then I'll erase this and add my stuff up there too. Also, I will have the key points and everything else uploaded, and the pictures uploaded in a folder for you as well in Canvas, so you'll have all that. Okay, but do please take notes. Please take notes as we go along, like you normally do. Okay, it's all up there on the Cornell sheets and everything else. Okay. Okay, folks, so when we think about the Middle Ages, you've all heard this term before, the Middle Ages. You don't even have to be some goofy historian to have heard this before, because the Middle Ages are kind of like that time period, that fun time period, I guess, even though they're anything but what that Hollywood loves to talk about, just like we talk about Egypt. Nobody cares about the Sumerians, but everybody's heard about Egypt, even if you're not some Egyptologist. You know about mummies, and you know about the pyramids.